I came home 2 days earlier than planned. As I pulled into the parking garage beneath our building, I looked up out of habit toward the 12th floor. Our bedroom window faced west, catching the last warm light of the afternoon. The bedroom light was on. Then, in the space of a heartbeat, it went dark. My husband had told me he would be downtown all afternoon meeting an important client. I almost smiled, thinking maybe he had forgotten something and come home early, but something inside me whispered not to call, not to text, just watch. I stayed in my car with the engine off. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the elevator doors opened into the lobby. A woman stepped out first. She lowered her sunglasses and glanced around before walking toward the parking lot. Then my husband followed. But the reason my blood ran cold wasn't because another woman had walked out of my apartment. It was because I knew exactly who she was. And 15 years earlier she had vanished from my life after destroying it once before. For 22 years I believed I had built the kind of marriage people admired. Not perfect, no marriage ever is, but solid, predictable, safe. David and I met when I was 23, and working my first real job at a regional insurance company in Indianapolis, Indiana. He was funny without trying too hard, confident, without being arrogant and patient in a way that made everyone around him feel important. He remembered birthdays, he opened doors. He called my mother every Mother's Day without me reminding him. When we married, everyone said I'd found one of the good ones. For a long time I believed they were right. We bought a modest townhouse, then later moved into the condominium overlooking the river after David's consulting business began taking off. We worked hard, paid our bills, and raised 2 wonderful children. Chloe was 22 now, finishing graduate school in Boston. Jake had just moved into his first apartment near Purdue University. The house that had once echoed with slammed doors, late-night laughter, forgotten backpacks, and endless loads of laundry had grown painfully quiet. People warn you about becoming empty nesters. What they don't tell you is that silence has its own sound. It forces you to hear things you'd ignored for years, the creak of a floorboard, the vibration of a phone quickly turned face down, the words, "I'm working late again." After the kids left, I started working part-time at the community library. It wasn't about the money. David earned more than enough for us to live comfortably. I simply wanted something that belonged to me again, a routine, new faces, conversations that weren't about grocery lists or utility bills. David supported the idea, or at least he said he did. "You've spent decades taking care of everyone else," he told me one evening while drying the dinner dishes. "It's your turn now." Those words stayed with me because they sounded sincere. Looking back now, sincerity can be an excellent disguise. About 8 months before everything fell apart, David's schedule began changing. His consulting firm had landed several larger corporate accounts, at least that's what he said. There were breakfast meetings, late dinners, weekend conferences, clients flying in from out of state. His phone, once left charging on the kitchen counter, never left his pocket anymore. If it buzzed while we watched television, he'd step into the hallway before answering. If I asked who called, he'd smile casually. "Just business." I wanted to believe him. After 22 years, trust becomes less of a choice and more of a habit. You stop questioning every inconsistency because life would become exhausting if you didn't. Besides, I had never caught David lying, not once. Or perhaps I'd simply never looked closely enough. The week everything changed, I traveled to Louisville, Kentucky for a 3-day library training conference. Nothing glamorous, just workshops about digital archives, literacy programs, and grant funding. David kissed me goodbye Monday morning. "Drive safely," he said. "I'll miss you. I'll be home Wednesday night. I'll make your favorite dinner." Simple words, ordinary words, exactly the kind that become impossible to forget later. The conference ended much earlier than expected Tuesday afternoon because one of the keynote speakers canceled. Most attendees headed home immediately. I thought about calling David. Instead, I smiled to myself. Why not surprise him? It had been years since we'd done something spontaneous. On the drive home, I stopped at his favorite butcher shop for 2 beautiful ribeye steaks. Then I picked up a bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet we'd been saving for a special occasion. Finally, I stopped at the bakery downtown and bought a cheesecake covered with fresh strawberries. As I loaded everything into the passenger seat, I actually laughed. David always teased me for buying too much dessert. 1 slice, he'd say, then he'd quietly eat 3. Traffic moved smoothly. I sang along with old songs on the radio. For the first time in months, I felt light, hopeful. I remember thinking maybe we needed more moments like this. Maybe we had simply become too comfortable, too busy. Maybe marriage wasn't falling apart. Maybe it just needed attention. I reached our building shortly after 4:30. The parking garage was unusually quiet. I grabbed my overnight bag but left the groceries in the car. Then something made me look up. Our bedroom light was glowing through the curtains. I frowned. It was still bright outside. David almost never turned that light on during the afternoon. Before I could think much about it, the light suddenly disappeared, not dimmed, not flickered, but switched off instantly. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. It wasn't fear, not yet, more like the uncomfortable sensation of remembering you've forgotten something important. I stood there holding my car keys, then slowly put my overnight bag back into the trunk. Without fully understanding why, I climbed back into the driver's seat instead of going upstairs. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe David had come home to change clothes. Maybe he wasn't feeling well. Maybe the timer on the bedroom lamp had malfunctioned. There were dozens of reasonable explanations, but I didn't start the engine. 5 minutes passed, then another 5. I watched people come and go through the glass entrance, a delivery driver, an elderly couple carrying groceries, a teenager walking an excited golden retriever. Then exactly 12 minutes after the bedroom light went out, the elevator doors opened inside the lobby. A woman stepped out. She wore oversized sunglasses despite being indoors, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail beneath a baseball cap. She paused just long enough to glance over her shoulder before walking toward the parking garage exit. Something about the way she moved felt painfully familiar. Then she removed her sunglasses. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. No. The word escaped before I realized I had spoken. It couldn't be. Not after all these years. Not after 15 years without a single phone call, without a letter, without an explanation. Amanda Vance, my former best friend, the woman who had disappeared from my life overnight, was walking out of my building, and seconds later, my husband stepped out behind her. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Amanda Vance, the name echoed through my mind like an old song I had spent years trying to forget. She hadn't changed as much as I expected. There were faint lines around her eyes now, and her hair carried a few strands of silver that caught the afternoon sunlight, but the way she walked with quiet confidence, shoulders back, head held high, was exactly the same. I watched her disappear through the garage exit without once looking behind her. Then David appeared. He looked relaxed, almost cheerful. He checked his watch, straightened the collar of his shirt, and pulled out his phone as though he had just finished an ordinary afternoon at work. He had no idea I was sitting less than 50 yards away. My first instinct was to jump out of the car to demand an explanation, to scream both of their names until the entire building came outside. Instead, I stayed perfectly still. Years of marriage teach you something about people. The louder your emotions become, the quieter your decisions should be. David climbed into his SUV and drove away toward downtown. Only after his taillights disappeared did I finally step out of my own car. Every movement felt unreal, as though I were watching another woman live my life. The elevator ride to the 12th floor seemed endless. When the doors opened, our hallway looked exactly as it always had. Fresh flowers sat on the table beside the elevators. Mrs. Jenkins from Unit 1203 had left her welcome mat slightly crooked again. Everything looked painfully ordinary, except nothing was. I unlocked our front door. The condo smelled faintly of David's cologne mixed with something else, a floral perfume I had never worn. I closed my eyes for a moment. The scent wasn't strong, just enough to tell me I wasn't imagining things. The living room was spotless. The kitchen island had been wiped clean. 2 wine glasses sat drying beside the sink. David never drank wine during the afternoon. Neither did I. Slowly, I walked toward our bedroom. The bed had been made too perfectly. David wasn't the kind of man who smoothed every wrinkle in a comforter before leaving the house. One pillow rested slightly higher than the other. Someone had rushed, not enough to leave obvious evidence, just enough for someone who knew the room to notice. I opened the closet. His navy blazer was gone, the one he'd claimed he was wearing to meet an important client. I looked at the laundry basket. A white bath towel lay folded neatly on top, still warm. My knees weakened. I sat on the edge of the bed before I fell. The room suddenly felt too quiet. 22 years. 22 years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, hospital visits, mortgage payments, late-night conversations, family vacations. Had all of that meant less to him than one afternoon with another woman? No. Something didn't fit. If David were having an affair, why would he bring her here? Why risk everything in our own home? He wasn't reckless. He planned everything. He always had. That thought stopped me. David wasn't impulsive. He calculated every business decision, every investment, every vacation itinerary. If Amanda had been here, there had to be a reason, and somehow I didn't think romance was the whole story. I walked into David's home office. His laptop was gone, nothing unusual there, but one file drawer wasn't completely closed. I almost ignored it, then curiosity won. Inside were neatly organized folders, insurance taxes, property records, investment statements. Everything looked perfectly normal until I noticed an empty space. A label remained on the shelf, home equity. The folder itself was missing. I frowned. David never misplaced important paperwork. Never. I quietly closed the drawer. For the next hour, I forced myself to think instead of react. I unpacked the groceries, placed the steaks in the refrigerator, put the cheesecake away, then I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that quickly grew cold. Around 6:30, David came home carrying his leather briefcase. He smiled the moment he saw me. "Rachel," he actually looked surprised. "What are you doing home already? The conference ended early." I stood and kissed his cheek. His expression didn't change, not even for a fraction of a second. If he felt guilty, he hid it remarkably well. "I was going to call you after my meeting," he said. "Really? Of course. How'd the client meeting go?" He loosened his tie and sighed dramatically. "Long. You know how these negotiations are. I wish I'd been anywhere else." I looked directly into his eyes. "They keep you busy. Busier than ever." Without hesitation, without blinking, the lie came as naturally as breathing. That hurt more than I expected, not because he lied, but because he'd become good at it. We ate dinner together. He complimented the steaks, laughed about something funny that had happened at the office, asked about my conference. Everything sounded exactly like every dinner we'd shared for years, except now every sentence carried a question underneath it. Was this rehearsed? Had he just spent the afternoon with Amanda before sitting across from me pretending everything was normal? After dessert, he excused himself to answer another business call. He stepped onto the balcony and closed the sliding door behind him. I watched his reflection in the glass. He wasn't speaking much, mostly listening. Then he smiled. Not the polite smile he used with clients, but a warm one, an intimate one. When he came back inside, he slipped his phone into his pocket almost automatically. I smiled. "I'm going to take a shower." "Sounds good," he replied. Upstairs with the bathroom fan running, I locked the door, then I cried for exactly 3 minutes. No more. When the tears stopped, I looked at myself in the mirror. Red eyes, steady voice. One question repeated itself over and over. Why Amanda? Out of everyone in the world, why her? I dried my face, walked back into the bedroom, and climbed into bed beside the man I'd trusted for more than 2 decades. David was already asleep within minutes, or pretending to be. I stared at the ceiling until after midnight. By morning, I had made the most important decision of my life. I wasn't going to confront my husband, not yet. If David and Amanda were hiding something, I intended to discover every last piece of it before either of them realized I was looking. The next morning, I waited until David left for his office. I stood by the window and watched his SUV pull out of the garage. Only then did I move. First, I checked his office again. The home equity folder was still gone. Then I opened the small fireproof safe in our closet. Birth certificates, passports, marriage license, old savings bonds from David's father, everything appeared untouched, but appearances meant nothing now. I took photos of every document. Then I called the one person I trusted who knew how to stay calm in a crisis, my cousin Sarah. She had worked as a paralegal for nearly 30 years and had seen more ugly divorces, secret accounts, and hidden assets than anyone I knew. When I told her I needed a lawyer but didn't want David to know, she didn't ask unnecessary questions. She simply said, "Write this name down, Arthur Vance." By noon, I was sitting in his office on the 4th floor of a quiet brick building downtown. Arthur was in his mid-50s with silver hair, rimless glasses, and the patient expression of a man who had learned never to react too quickly. He listened while I told him everything: the early return, the bedroom light, Amanda David's lie, the missing folder. When I finished, Arthur leaned back in his chair and tapped one finger against his legal pad. "You're right not to confront him yet." Hearing that made my stomach twist. "So you think something is wrong?" I think he said carefully that people rarely risk bringing someone into the marital home unless they feel very confident. Confidence usually means planning. I swallowed. What do I do? Nothing emotional. Nothing dramatic. From this point on, you document, you preserve records, you check credit reports, you don't sign anything, and if your husband asks you to agree to a financial move, you call me first. Then he paused. "Do you know what Amanda Vance does now?" "No. She's a notary public." For a moment I didn't understand why that mattered. Then the air seemed to leave the room. A notary. Someone who could witness signatures, certify documents, make paperwork look legitimate. Arthur saw my expression change. That does not prove anything, he said, but it gives us a place to start. 2 days later, Arthur referred me to a private investigator named Marcus Cole. Marcus was 58, broad-shadowed, quiet, and direct, in a way I immediately appreciated. He asked for dates, names, locations, vehicle descriptions, and any financial accounts I knew about. He didn't promise miracles. He didn't offer sympathy. He simply said, "If they're meeting, I'll find the pattern." And he did. Within 1 week, Marcus sent me the first photos: David and Amanda outside a bank. David and Amanda entering a law office. David and Amanda sitting together in a small cafe 20 minutes from our condo, heads bent over a folder. Not lovers whispering over coffee partners reviewing paperwork. That frightened me more. The final photo in the batch made my hands go cold. David stood beside Amanda near her car. He was handing her a thick envelope. On the front, written in black marker, were 2 words Rachel signed. I stared at that photo until the letters blurred. Signed what I had not signed anything. Not recently, not for David, not for our home, not for any investment. That evening, David came home with flowers. Yellow roses, my favorite. I passed the shop and thought of you, he said. Before that would have softened me. Now it felt like watching an actor deliver a line he had practiced in the mirror. I took the flowers anyway. They're beautiful. He smiled, relieved, and that was when I understood something important. David did not think I suspected him. Not even a little. That gave me power, a terrible kind of power, but power all the same. So I played my part. I cooked dinner, asked about his meetings, laughed at his stories, kissed him goodnight, and every time he looked away I quietly collected another piece of the truth. Because the woman who had stepped out of that elevator had not just returned to my life, she had brought the past with her, and this time I was not going to let Amanda Vance disappear before I found out exactly what she and my husband had done. The first real crack in David's story didn't come from a photograph. It came from a credit report. Arthur had told me to request a copy from all 3 credit bureaus. It sounds boring, he'd said, but paperwork tells the truth long before people do. He was right. Buried between familiar accounts I'd recognized for years was something new, a home equity line of credit opened 9 months earlier. My eyes immediately moved to the amount $250,000. I read the page 3 times. Our condominium had substantial equity, but David and I had never discussed borrowing against it. We didn't need to. Our mortgage had almost been paid off. I grabbed the folder containing our household records. Nothing. No application, no approval notice, no monthly statements, nothing. I called Arthur before panic could take over. Don't contact the bank yet, he said. Let me make a few inquiries first. His voice remained calm, but I could hear a new seriousness beneath it. Rachel, did you ever sign loan documents during the past year? No. Any electronic signatures? No. Any power of attorney? Absolutely not. There was a brief silence. I'll call you tomorrow. That night, David seemed happier than usual. He even suggested we plan a weekend trip after Chloe finished her semester. We haven't gotten away in forever, he said. I smiled across the dinner table. I'd like that. The words tasted like sand. As he spoke about lakeside cabins and hiking trails, I couldn't stop wondering whether he was planning a vacation or buying time. The next afternoon, Arthur called. I need you to come in. His tone told me everything. When I arrived, several documents were already spread across his conference table. One was the loan agreement, another was a notarized affidavit, the third was a signature page. Arthur slid the last document toward me. Take your time. My name appeared at the bottom, Rachel Whitmore. At first glance it looked exactly like my signature, the looping R, the long tail on the end, the slight slant to the right. Anyone who didn't know me would have accepted it without hesitation. But I knew it wasn't mine. I picked up a pen, then signed my name on a blank sheet beside it. The differences became obvious. The forged signature was slower, too careful, almost as if someone had practiced it dozens of times. They copied it, I whispered. Arthur nodded. I believe so. Then he pointed to the notary seal. The name printed beneath it made my stomach drop. Amanda Vance. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Arthur leaned forward. Rachel, this changes everything. I looked up. What does this mean? It means your husband may have obtained a $250,000 loan using documents that appear to contain a forged signature, and Amanda certified them. That's what it appears. I suddenly felt cold despite the warm office. This isn't just an affair. No, Arthur replied quietly. It never was. Marcus's investigation intensified. Instead of simply following David, he began tracing his financial activity. Every few days another report landed in Arthur's inbox. Transfers, wire payments, new investment accounts, corporate filings. Most were legal, some were unusual. Then came the report that changed the entire case. David hadn't borrowed only once. He'd refinanced a small commercial property he owned before our marriage. He'd liquidated one retirement account. He'd quietly moved money into an investment company neither Arthur nor I had ever heard of. The company had only 2 listed officers, David Whitmore and Amanda Vance. I stared at the report in disbelief. Partners, not just secretly seeing each other business partners. Can he do this? I asked. He can form a company, Arthur answered, but whether he used marital assets improperly. He closed the folder. That's another question. At home, David's behavior became increasingly strange. He began asking casual questions that no longer sounded casual. Have you checked the mail today? Did the bank send anything? Any paperwork come while I was gone? Each question lasted only a few seconds, but together they formed a pattern. He was worried. Not about me, about documents, so I pretended not to notice. No, I'd answer with a shrug, just bills. Every time I watched relief wash across his face. One Friday evening he poured us each a glass of wine. I've been thinking, he began. Whenever someone starts a sentence that way, trouble usually follows. Our financial advisor thinks we should simplify things. I smiled. What do you mean? Maybe sell the condo, he said it casually, as though suggesting a different restaurant. The market's high. We could buy something smaller, invest the difference. He watched my face carefully, waiting, measuring, calculating. Months earlier, I would have asked questions immediately. Instead, I took a slow sip of wine. Maybe. His shoulders relaxed. You think so? I'd like to see the numbers first. Of course. I'll have everything ready. Everything. The word echoed in my mind. What exactly was he planning to show me, and what was he planning to hide? The answer arrived sooner than expected. Early Monday morning, Marcus called Arthur. Within an hour, we were all sitting together reviewing new photographs. David and Amanda had met outside the county records office. They weren't holding hands. They weren't kissing. Instead, they were carrying thick document folders. One photograph showed Amanda pointing toward a page while David nodded. Another showed them shaking hands, professional, focused, almost relieved. Marcus laid one final picture on the table. This one was taken yesterday. David stood beside Amanda outside a law office. She handed him a large envelope. Across the front were 4 typed words. Final transfer package. No names, no addresses, just those words. Arthur slowly removed his glasses. I think they're almost finished. Finished with what I asked. He looked directly at me. I don't know yet, but whatever they've been building, it's reaching the final stage. Outside Arthur's office, window traffic moved through downtown exactly as it always had. People hurried to lunch, buses stopped at corners, life continued. Mine had quietly become something else entirely. For weeks I'd believed I was uncovering an affair. Now I understood I was uncovering a financial conspiracy, and I had the sinking feeling that I still hadn't discovered the worst part. I stopped thinking like a wife. I started thinking like a witness. That single shift changed everything. For weeks I had been asking myself the wrong question. Why would David do this to me? Now I asked a different one. How far had he already gone? Arthur called me the following Tuesday. I think we found the missing piece. His voice was steady, but I had learned that when Arthur sounded the calmest, the news was usually the worst. An hour later, I sat across from him in his conference room. 3 folders rested neatly on the table. One was labeled Property Records, another read Investment Transfers, the third had no label at all. Arthur slid the unlabeled folder toward me. I think you should read this yourself. Inside were copies of estate planning documents. At first I didn't understand why he was showing them to me, then I saw David's signature. My eyes moved to the next page. My breath caught. It was a revised will. The document had been signed just 4 months earlier. I scanned the first paragraph expecting to see my name. Instead I found Amanda's. She wasn't identified as a friend or as a business associate. She was listed as the beneficiary of David's ownership interest in the investment company. She would also receive the lake house his father had left him. I turned another page. There was a section describing a trust. I searched for my name again. Nothing. Not a dollar, not a keepsake, not even a sentence acknowledging the woman he'd been married to for more than 2 decades. My hands trembled as I closed the folder, so I whispered he planned to leave me with nothing. Arthur folded his hands. I don't believe that's the entire plan. I looked up. What do you mean? He opened the second folder. Look at the debt. There were spreadsheets listing loans, credit lines, and outstanding obligations. Some were legitimate business expenses. Others had been secured using marital assets. If these transactions had continued, Arthur explained, I could have found myself responsible for a substantial portion of these liabilities, while many of the appreciating assets had already been moved elsewhere. I stared at the numbers. For months, David had been quietly rearranging our financial life, not in a single dramatic move, but in dozens of small ones. Small enough to avoid attention, large enough to change everything. Arthur leaned forward. The good news is that we found this before the process was complete. The bad news. He gave me a sympathetic look. We have to move now. That afternoon we met with a forensic accountant named Dana Miller. She spent nearly 3 hours reviewing bank statements, tax returns, and corporate filings. She barely spoke while she worked. Finally, she removed her glasses. Your husband is organized, she said, but he's also predictable. What does that mean? He moved money in stages. She pointed to a chart she'd drawn. Every major transfer was preceded by a smaller one. Every new account was funded through an existing account. Every transaction leaves a trail. She tapped the page once, and trails can be followed. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected: hope. Not because David might lose, but because the truth could still be proven. Arthur immediately began taking protective steps. He advised me to open an individual checking account. I redirected my paycheck from the library. I changed every online password that belonged solely to me. My credit reports were frozen. We notified the banks that my identity might have been compromised. Every step felt strangely ordinary: no courtroom, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just paperwork, phone calls, forms. Yet each small action quietly closed another door David had assumed would remain open. 3 days later, the first sign appeared that our strategy was working. David came home unusually late. He didn't kiss me hello. He walked straight into his office and shut the door. From the hallway, I heard him speaking in a low, tense voice. No. A pause. That doesn't make any sense. Another pause. Who stopped it? Silence. Then I'll call you tomorrow. When he emerged 20 minutes later, he looked exhausted. You okay? I asked. He forced a smile. Long day. I nodded as though I believed him. Inside, I knew exactly what had happened. One of the transfers had failed. Someone had finally asked questions, and for the first time, David didn't have all the answers. The following week, Marcus called with another update. I've been watching Amanda. What did you find? She seems nervous. Nervous how? Routine changed. She checks her mirrors while driving. She leaves work through different exits. Yesterday, she spent nearly an hour inside her attorney's office. I exchanged a glance with Arthur. Pressure was building. People who believed they had the perfect plan rarely hired lawyers at the last minute. Someone knew the walls were beginning to close in. That evening, David barely touched his dinner. He kept checking his phone. Twice he stepped outside to make calls. When he returned the second time, I noticed something I hadn't seen in years: his hands were shaking. I said nothing. Sometimes silence tells people they're still safe. Sometimes it encourages them to make one more mistake. And I needed David to believe he was still in control. Because he wasn't, not anymore. David tried to hide it. For 22 years I'd watched him negotiate contracts, calm nervous clients, and solve problems without raising his voice. He had always been composed. Now tiny cracks were beginning to show. He slept with his phone under his pillow. He checked the locks on the front door twice before going to bed. One morning I found him staring out the kitchen window with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. When he noticed me, he smiled too quickly. You okay? I asked. Just thinking about work. I nodded. So am I. Neither of us was talking about work. 2 days later, Arthur called just after lunch. I need you downtown. Is something wrong? No. A brief pause. Something finally went right. When I arrived, Dana, the forensic accountant, already had several spreadsheets spread across the conference table. She looked almost excited. We found the missing money. I sat down immediately. What do you mean? She turned her laptop toward me. Your husband wasn't moving funds randomly. Colored lines connected dozens of transactions. They all end here. She pointed to one account. It belonged to the investment company David and Amanda had created together. But that's not the important part. She opened another document. This account required 2 authorized signatures for withdrawals over $50,000. I frowned. So David couldn't move the largest amounts by himself. My eyes widened. Amanda. Dana nodded. Every major transfer required both of them. That meant this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It wasn't a brief affair that had spiraled out of control. It was a coordinated plan, months, perhaps years in the making. Arthur slid another document across the table. This arrived this morning. It was a notice from one of the banks. A transfer request had been suspended pending additional identity verification. The amount made my stomach tighten. $187,000. Was he trying to move this yesterday? I asked. We believe so, Arthur said. And because your credit has been frozen and the bank was notified of possible identity fraud, he allowed himself a small smile. Someone finally started asking questions. For the first time since that afternoon in the parking garage, I felt the balance begin to shift. David was no longer moving freely. Someone was watching him besides me. That evening, I deliberately acted exactly as I always had. I asked about his day. He barely looked up from his plate. Busy. Anything interesting? Not really. His answers were shorter than usual, distracted. After dinner, he opened his laptop. Within minutes, frustration flashed across his face. He refreshed the same page repeatedly, then another, then picked up his phone. No answer. I asked casually, Everything okay? He startled slightly. What? You've called someone 3 times. Oh, he forced a laugh. Client. They're impossible to reach. I smiled sympathetically. I hate when that happens. Inside I knew exactly who wasn't answering Amanda. The following afternoon Marcus called. I've got something. His voice was lower than usual. What is it? Amanda met with another attorney this morning. I thought she already had one. She does. This wasn't about estate planning. It was a criminal defense firm. Silence settled between us. Finally I asked, do you think she's scared? I think she's preparing. For what Marcus didn't answer immediately. For the possibility that David blames her first. That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but once Marcus said it I couldn't stop thinking about it. People who planned together often fell apart together. Loyalty lasted only as long as everyone believed they would escape. If one of them thought prison, financial ruin, or public disgrace was coming, the partnership would collapse. 3 mornings later it finally happened. David was in the shower when his phone vibrated on the bathroom counter. Normally I never would have looked. Now I simply glanced at the illuminated screen. No password, just a preview notification before it disappeared. Amanda, we need to talk. This can't wait. Nothing more. No hearts, no affectionate language, just fear. David grabbed the phone before I could see another message. You ready for work? He asked. I am. He searched my face for a moment, perhaps wondering whether I'd noticed anything. If he was suspicious, he hid it. He kissed my forehead and left. The front door clicked shut. I stood perfectly still. Then my own phone rang. It was Arthur. His first words were calm. Rachel, we've reached the point where David can't quietly finish what he started. I closed my eyes. What happens now? Arthur's answer came without hesitation. Now he starts making mistakes. The first mistake came 48 hours later. David called me at work just before noon. His voice was unusually warm. Hey, he said, any chance you could leave a little early today? I looked around the quiet library before answering. I probably can. Why? I scheduled a meeting with our financial advisor. I let a beat pass. For what? I've been thinking about what we talked about the condo. If we're going to downsize someday, we should start planning now. There it was, the conversation he'd been trying to have for weeks. I'll see if I can get away, I replied. Great, I'll pick you up at 4. When I hung up, I immediately called Arthur. He didn't sound surprised. I've been expecting this. So have I. What should I do? You go and you sign absolutely nothing. The financial advisor's office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. David greeted me with the smile I'd fallen in love with 22 years earlier. For just a moment I almost forgot everything. Then I remembered Amanda's name on the forged documents. The smile disappeared from my heart, even if it remained on my face. The advisor, a pleasant man named Kevin, welcomed us into his office. Folders already waited on the conference table. David did most of the talking. He explained how simplifying our finances would make retirement easier, how selling the condo while the market remained strong was the smart move, how consolidating assets would reduce taxes. Every sentence sounded reasonable. Every explanation sounded practiced. Kevin slid the first document toward me. If everything looks good, we'll just need your signatures. Plural, not singular. I glanced at David. His eyes never left me waiting. Watching, calculating. I slowly turned the pages instead of reaching for the pen. Halfway through, I looked up. I'd like to have my attorney review these first. The room fell silent. David laughed. Rachel, we don't need attorneys. It's routine. Maybe I closed the folder. But it's routine for me too. For the first time in our marriage, I saw genuine panic flash across his face. It lasted less than a second, but it was there. The drive home was painfully quiet. David kept both hands on the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke. You've never mentioned an attorney before. I've never needed one before. You don't trust me. I turned toward him. I trust good paperwork. His jaw tightened. Neither of us said another word. The following morning, Arthur's office became unexpectedly busy. Dana was there. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later carrying another thick file. So Arthur began. David tried to move faster. Marcus nodded. After yesterday's meeting, he drove directly to Amanda's office. He placed several photographs on the table. David and Amanda were arguing, not quietly, not professionally. Even from a distance, the tension was obvious. One photograph showed Amanda pointing toward a folder. Another captured David throwing both hands into the air. The last image froze them, standing several feet apart, neither willing to look at the other. They're turning on each other, I said. I believe so, Marcus replied. That afternoon, Arthur received the call we'd been waiting for. The bank's fraud department had completed its preliminary review. Several documents submitted over the previous year contained significant signature inconsistencies. The matter had been referred for a formal investigation. Neither Arthur nor I celebrated. It wasn't over, not yet, but the truth had finally left our private files and entered an official process. David could no longer make it disappear. 3 days later, Amanda made the decision that changed everything. Through her attorney, she agreed to cooperate with investigators not because she suddenly found her conscience, but because she was trying to save herself. She admitted she had notarized documents she had not personally witnessed being signed. She admitted David had assured her that I had already approved everything. She admitted she had ignored warning signs she should never have ignored. She denied forging my signature herself. Whether that was true would be determined later. But one thing became unmistakably clear: David had been the architect. Amanda had been the facilitator. David called me 6 times that evening. I let every call go to voicemail. On the 7th attempt, he texted, "We need to talk. Please." I answered with 3 words, "Tomorrow, Arthur's office." David arrived 5 minutes early. He looked older than he had a week before. His tie hung loose. Dark circles framed his eyes. For the first time in decades, he seemed unsure of himself. Arthur invited everyone into the conference room. No raised voices, no dramatic speeches. Just documents one after another: loan records, bank statements, corporate filings, property transfers, signature comparisons, photographs, timelines. The evidence spoke more clearly than any accusation ever could. David stared silently at the stack growing in front of him. Finally, he whispered, "Amanda talked." "Yes," Arthur replied. David closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked directly at me. "When did you know?" I held his gaze. "Not everything, but enough," he swallowed. "No, I mean, when did you first realize?" I thought back to the parking garage, the afternoon sun, the bedroom window, the lights suddenly disappearing, then the elevator doors opening. "I knew," I said quietly, "the moment I watched Amanda walk out of our building." David lowered his head. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, he had nothing left to say. The divorce was finalized 9 months later. People often imagine the end of a marriage as one dramatic moment: a judge striking a gavel, someone storming out of a courtroom, a final argument that changes everything. The truth was quieter. It ended with signatures, calendar dates, boxes packed one room at a time, and the strange realization that a person who had once known every detail of your life had become someone you no longer recognized. David and I barely spoke during those months except through our attorneys. When we did, our conversations stayed practical: utilities, insurance, the condo. There were no desperate promises, no shouting, no scenes that would have made an interesting story. The damage had already been done. Words couldn't undo it. The investigation moved forward without me needing to push it. The bank concluded that several loan documents contained signatures that required further examination. Because questions had been raised before additional assets were transferred, most of the remaining transactions were frozen. The investment company David and Amanda had spent months building became the center of financial scrutiny. Their carefully arranged plan unraveled much faster than it had been assembled. One missing document led to another, one interview led to another, one explanation contradicted the next. Eventually, the truth became too large for either of them to control. Amanda lost far more than she expected. Her professional reputation, built over years, disappeared almost overnight. She sent me a handwritten letter several weeks after the investigation began. I read it once, then I placed it back inside the envelope. She apologized. She admitted she had ignored doubts because David convinced her everything had already been discussed between us. She claimed she never intended to destroy my marriage. Perhaps she believed that. Perhaps she even needed to believe it herself. But intentions could not erase consequences. I never replied. Some conversations belong in the past. David tried to reach me several times after the divorce. At first, he left practical messages. There are still a few tax documents. I found another box of Chloe's photographs. Then the messages changed. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I wish I could explain everything. I think about what I destroyed every day." One evening, nearly a year after I had watched Amanda leave our building, he called again. This time I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "I was going to tell you." I looked out my apartment window before answering. "No, you were going to finish." Silence. Then I heard him exhale. "I suppose you're right." That was the last conversation we ever had. Chloe and Jake struggled with everything at first. No child wants to believe one parent betrayed the other. They loved their father. They loved me. For a while they felt caught between two lives. I never asked them to choose. I never criticized David in front of them. I simply answered their questions honestly whenever they asked. Over time, they read the documents for themselves. They saw the timelines, the financial records, the investigation. They reached their own conclusions. Our relationship became stronger not because we shared the same anger but because we shared the same truth. I moved into a smaller condominium on the other side of the city. It had one bedroom, a bright kitchen, and a balcony overlooking a small park. There was no grand staircase, no oversized dining room, no guest suite, just enough space for the life I wanted to build. For the first time in years, every decision belonged to me. I painted the walls the soft blue David had always disliked. I filled the bookshelves with novels instead of decorative trophies. I bought fresh flowers every Friday. Not because someone else might enjoy them, but because I did. People often confuse starting over with losing everything. They're not the same. Sometimes starting over means finally carrying only what was truly yours to begin with. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after everything had begun, I drove back to our old neighborhood. Not because I missed it, but because I wanted to see how it felt. The building looked exactly the same. Children played near the entrance, a delivery driver wheeled boxes through the lobby, someone laughed on a nearby balcony. Life had continued without asking anyone's permission. I parked across the street in almost the exact spot where I had sat that afternoon, the place where I had watched the bedroom light go dark, the place where I had watched the elevator doors open. I looked up toward the 12th floor. The curtains were different now. Someone else lived there. Someone else called it home. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt gratitude. Not for what had happened, but for what I had learned. Trust should never require blindness. Love should never require silence. And peace is worth far more than the appearance of a perfect marriage. I started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back in the mirror. Some chapters don't need one final glance. They only need the courage to close.